Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
So we planted 1,000 churches in 2 years. I really felt like we had finished our work there. They were doing church planting now on their own. It was time for us to leave and move on. By 5 years, those 1,000 churches had become 1,700 churches, and hundreds of thousands of people had received Jesus who had never heard the gospel before. I think that in that experience is when I really developed a heart for church planting, for unreached people, kind of developed our missiology. We just watched what God was blessing, and we said, let's build our missiology around that. I'm smart enough to understand, do what God's blessing. And we eliminated some things that he wasn't blessing, and that's how we got our start. We then moved, and there were some real financial miracles in raising this money as well. My church got behind it. I thought maybe they would do 5 of these churches at about $2,000 a piece. That's all it takes. And on the Commitment Sunday, I asked for people to make their commitments and walk there like you're going to walk your contract with the Lord down to faith promise down to the altar. That church on that Sunday planted 131 churches. And we were off to the races. I said, oh my, there is something on both sides of the equation, the African side as well as the American church side, when people figure out what they can do to really change the world.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, Jay Patnick will be interviewing Ray and Linda Noah, the founders of the Petros Network, a faith-based organization that partners to equip Indigenous leaders to share, show, and spread the good news of Jesus amongst their own people and end spiritual and physical poverty. Let's listen in.
Well, Ray and Linda, thanks for making time to talk to me. I'm excited to spend some more time with you. We've spent a decent amount of time together, but we get more time together. So thanks for making time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good to be together.
Yeah, it'll be good. Yeah, and I think it would be good to start where all good stories start. Maybe Linda, I'll start with you. I've known you guys now for a number of years, but it's usually in like 20-minute increments. Every once in a while, we'll have like an hour together. So I'm excited to just hear a little more of your story because I've heard it in pieces, but it'll be fun to kind of hear a bit more and then to hear more about, of course, what's going on with Petros. But Linda, tell me a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up.
Well, I'm a California girl. I actually was born in Burbank, grew up in Huntington Beach.
Wow.
And on the beaches, that was my start in life. And when I was about middle school, my parents moved to Oregon. And I moved from complete cement to complete farmland and tried to survive a city girl in a farmland place. So wow. There's plenty of stories about that.
I bet. Well, and so what were your parents doing in California? Like, what was sort of their vocation that then led them to Oregon?
Well, my dad always wanted to do missions work, and his hobby was flying airplanes. And so we moved to Oregon, went on land, built our own runway, and had 8 Cessna airplanes on the property. And then my dad just started fixing airplanes for missionaries, and he flew for a lot of evangelists in Lear jets and Falcon jets, and that was his way of doing ministry. And then missionaries would fly into a hangar that we had, and he'd repair their airplanes.
Wow.
So rural missions has always been a really big part of my life.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. That is quite a commitment. Like, okay, so we are going all in. We're going to buy land. We're going to have a hangar. We're going to buy planes. So that means, I mean, it's an assumption, but it sounds like church and faith were a big part of life. Like that was growing up. Like we are about what Jesus is doing.
Totally. Totally committed. My parents were leaders in their church, served in the church. My parents believed in the gifts and the move of the Spirit, believed in healing. And that was just a big part of my entire childhood.
So maybe this is going in too far, but were you going on these trips too? As you're growing up, are you just mostly staying in Oregon, or are you getting to dot around and see what these different missionaries or pastors do?
No. So I'm the oldest of 5. And the kind of the joke in our family was wherever my parents were, they left a child. So I was the firstborn. So they left me in Oregon, and then they'd go move someplace else, and there another child would stabilize in that area. So our family was just all over the place. That's made it hard. Honestly, like keeping us back all connected again. But
yeah. Wow.
But you flew with your dad, didn't you, Linda? I mean,
I did. So my dad had a belief when his kids turned 16, they were to get a driver's license and their pilot license.
Whoa.
And so I started, didn't finish. And so I'm the oldest failure child in flight school.
But I bet you could hack your way around the plane then. If you'd been around it, you probably know what's going on.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it doesn't scare me. And then I worked for a large corporation at one point, and we were flying all over the world. We were in 43 nations. And I introduced the owner of the company to my father, and we bought airplanes for the company. And then I was able to fly in Lear jets and Falcon jets on all of our business.
Wow.
So it ended up being something that went all the way through my life as a big part of it. And now, we fly into South Sudan and we're on these little missions aviation planes, and it feels like home.
I've been on a few of those, and it does not feel like home to me. I was not raised how you were raised. I'm like, wow, this is terrifying. This is smaller than a minivan, and we're in the air. This is not right. Something's wrong about this. Okay, so before I go to Ray, help me think about it. You got then toward the end of high school. You've been living, in this kind of world. What were you thinking you were going to do? Like you're getting to the end of high school. You're like, this is what I think my life's going to be.
Well, back when I was 7 years old, I felt the Lord called me into missions. And so that just carried me. I was an oldest child, but I just always knew God had his hand upon my life. And so that kept me being a good girl and all the way through high school. And so it just made sense to go to Bible college as soon as I graduated from high school.
That's so great. Well, yeah, and I can make some guesses on where it goes from there, but I want to pick up with Ray. So Ray, while she's out, flying in planes with her dad, dreaming about going all over the world, where were you born and where did you grow up?
I grew up in, I was born in Northern California, way north in Eureka.
You're both Cali people.
Humboldt County it's called. And then my parents moved early on when my dad received Christ, and almost immediately launched into ministry. So they moved to Southern Oregon. So our claim to fame, both in Northern California and Southern Oregon, was it was the marijuana growing capital of the world. So that's what I was doing. It was also pretty rural, and timber industry was king in that part. So when Linda was flying and doing things for the Lord, thinking about missions, I was cutting down trees and smoking marijuana. So.
That's pretty great. So it also sounds like it sounds like church was a big part of your family's life. Yeah. Because your dad jumps right in, but doesn't take with you right away. You're like, I don't know what this is. I had feet in both worlds. I knew faith was real. I had a relationship with Jesus. I just was always pushing the boundaries of stuff. So my dad wasn't educated. He just got a high school diploma, took some Bible courses, and went out and started pastoring basically church plants. They used to call them pioneer churches back in those days. So small, rural, unsophisticated Southern Oregon. I admired my dad. I really did. I thought, wow, this guy's really a man of faith. And I found him and his ministry, his sermons interesting, but I just didn't think it was for me, the ministry side of it. But I did develop a relationship with Jesus. And I think I really had a come to Jesus moment, I think when I was a sophomore or junior in high school, where I got in a fair amount of trouble doing the things that I just described. And my parents, I got busted. And my parents looked at me and they said, this is not what you want, is it? And I think for the first time in my life, I went,
no, it's not what I want.
Mm.
And so it wasn't like I walked to the altar and gave my life to Jesus. It just was like, no, I know who I am.
Mm.
And I know God has his hand on my life. And so I want to pursue that. Now that I didn't think that meant vocationally, I just knew I needed to live for Jesus. So I made a decision. And so from probably sophomore, junior year in high school on, I just have been a Christ follower.
Mm. I obviously, as I'm listening to you, I know where this story's going. And so what's amazing is whenever you hear people's stories, you can hear how God's preparing them way in advance. Like even when they're not thinking about what God intends for their life. Like, so your dad's planting rural churches just out of faith, just going for it. So you're probably, without even knowing it, your heart for brave, uneducated pastors in rural areas is already forming in you.
Yeah.
And then you have Linda flying around on planes, and then eventually it sounds like doing that for a career with a heart for missions, just to see your story so early on before you can even think about what God might want to do with your life. It's being wired into you so early, both of you on separate tracks. It's just, it never ceases to amaze me, the ways that God just sets us up. And I don't know, I've got 2 young kids. And so to just keep encouraging them, like, you don't actually know what God's doing.
Right.
Like, there's these pieces of your life that you're like, what does this have to do with anything? Or, oh man, I'm trying to get away from that. Like, whatever this thing is, I got to get out of here. But you don't realize what the Lord's putting together. Okay, so you then get out of high school and you're thinking, what are you going to do? You're thinking, okay, I got to get out of high school and go do something.
Yeah. My parents said to me, you will go to college. We're not paying for it, but you're going to go to college. So the day I graduate, the next day after graduating high school, and I'd been working in a sawmill, a lumber mill, in my senior year in high school. I'd work the graveyard shift, come home, sleep, go to school, finish up. So I was making some pretty good money. And I graduated, and I was planning on going to school, but my dad walked in the next day and said, congratulations, son, you graduated. Now you owe me rent. So I said, well, if I'm going to pay rent, I'm going to go somewhere else and have fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, I ended up going to Southern Oregon State University, and it's now called Southern Oregon University. And I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So that's how I started out. And I went to, for whatever reason, I've always been pulled back into the church. So in this town that's like 2 hours away, I went to a kind of a youth conference at a local church. And it was during that message, or the message and then the call, that I found myself walking the aisle. Here's the walk in the aisle experience. And I said, I don't know what it is. I don't want to be a pastor, but God, I want to give my life to you vocationally. And so back in the day, I thought the only thing other than pastoring would have been Christian counseling. And so I was going to transfer from Southern Oregon University to Willamette University in Salem, and then pursue a counseling degree. I ended up going to the same college up in Seattle that Linda went to. Just some different circumstances led me up there. But and then I thought, I would be a horrible counselor. And I really would have.
Truly.
Empathy level. No, I'm sorry I brought you into this, Linda. It exposed me there. Low on empathy and mercy and all that kind of stuff,
Wow.
But I've always been interested in more intellectual pursuits. And so I pursued a degree in religion and philosophy. Had a minor in New Testament Greek and history. I thought I'd go on and get my master's degree, and become maybe a professor, teach philosophy, sit under a tree and gather students around me and muse about the universe or something. But so, and then I met Linda, and the rest is history.
And here we go. Yeah. So, okay. Linda, so you get out thinking, I'm pursuing ministry. And then do you go straight to the college where you meet Ray?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you guys meet there, fall in love. It's storybook, I imagine. And then the two of you are discerning a call. Did you guys get married in college or when you get out of college?
So we got married in college.
Okay.
I always felt I was called into the mission field.
Right.
And so I actually had a dream of Ray, and the Lord told me, this is who you're going to marry.
Wow.
And so one day this dream became real. And I went, oh my goodness, that's who I'm going to marry. At that time, there weren't a lot of women graduating. So I just ran on the other side of campus because I wanted a degree. And so I thought, man, I'm not joining the MRS club, Mrs. Club, and I want to get this BA and do something with my life. And so I totally ignored him and went the other way. But in my heart, I knew God said, that's the man you're going to marry.
Wow.
Then when we finally met, and that was fun, but we started dating, and I said, hey, I'm going on the mission field. And he says, well, I'm not. And missions will be a part of my life, but I'm not going on the mission field.
Wow.
And that, of course, brought tons of tears. And I'm like, oh, man, I blew that. And then as I continued to pray about it, God said, no, this is the guy you're going to marry. And the things that you do and the things that you say can make or break this man. And so I just knew at that moment, whatever it was, that was that we were going to get married.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a separate podcast altogether. There's a lot of moving parts in there. Yeah. Wow. And so you're like, I know I'm marrying this guy. I know I'm called to missions.
Mm-hmm.
Those things aren't fitting together now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just going to have to trust somehow that'll work out. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know what God's doing.
Yeah. I don't mean this to sound arrogant, because we don't feel this at all, but the Lord told me he may never get famous, but he's going to be a part of one of the largest moves of God the world has ever seen.
Wow.
And I just thought, okay, God, you've led me all my life into this. And, it didn't help that he wasn't incredibly good looking and all of the women wanted him. So, I wasn't selling out. He was quite the catch on campus.
Wow.
And so we went down that route.
But so you're hearing this guy's going to be a part of a move of God.
Yeah.
Somehow God's going to work this out. Meanwhile, he's hearing, yeah, maybe I'll teach philosophy as a professor. Like the different streams you guys are imagining are not lining up. Other than, man, I think we're supposed to be together, but we have this other stuff running in the background.
Yeah, I think I heard God's voice so strong that I wasn't hearing Ray's voice. And so I wasn't aware, really, when I think about it. And he says now, well, I was never going to be a pastor. And I went, what? Wait, what? Why are we married?
This is perfect. I love everything happening here. And by the way, you don't know Danielle and I's story that well, but it's almost identical. I was like, I know exactly what God's asked me to do. I know what we're going to do. I can see it all. And she's like, nope, I'm not doing any of that. Like any of it. We're not doing that. I'm not doing that. So that means we're not going to be together. But then the Lord is like, nope, this is the guy for you. Trust me, everything in your heart will come to pass, but just not the way you're imagining it. So just trust me. So
yeah, I always said this: if we had planned our lives, we would have planned it too small. Mm-hmm. And so just listening to the voice of the Lord and every step of the way, following the next step. And it's been an amazing journey.
Wow. Okay. So then, Ray, you're going to be a professor. Linda's convinced you're going to be a part of the move of God, whether she says that to you or not. Somehow the Lord tricks you into marrying each other without having a clear enough conversation to see where you're disagreeing. And so, and it sounds like, listening to you, Ray, your story is a story of a series of conversions. Like the way Luther says, you're not converted once, you're converted continually. So like, I know Jesus is real. Okay, I'll give him my whole life. All right, okay, I'll do what he wants me to do. Okay, I'll do vocation if you want me to. it sounds like another conversion's about to happen where you say, I think I'm going to be a pastor. How did that get put into your heart?
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I mean, there's this series of defining moments, I guess, that I had that was like, Anyway, so we got married, we graduated, got our BA in Seattle at a Bible school, Christian school. As I was planning on moving to Eugene, Oregon, to go to U of O to get my master's in philosophy, a church called us up and they said, "Hey, we want you to come and be our middle school pastors." Me. And I had just had this other experience where as I'm in Bible college in Seattle, I realized I'm kind of drying up spiritually. I'm in the midst of all of this great Bible teaching and this and that, and I'm just getting dry. I'm getting empty. And I reasoned, the best thing I could do to stay plugged into the Lord is to plug into his people. And so I took a part-time job as a youth pastor in a really dinky church in North Seattle. Didn't know what I was doing. I'd never taken a preaching class, a ministry class, a leadership class. It was all philosophy. So anyway, I got started there, and I knew that I always wanted to be a part of a church, even if it was just volunteering. And so we got a call as we're contemplating moving to Eugene. I got a call from the church that was pastored by Brian McLeese's dad, Murray McLeese. We ended up going there, and I had been in churches of 50, 60, 75, maybe 100 at the most. And here's this church at the time. It's about 3,000 people. That was bigger than my hometown in Southern Oregon,
Right.
And, it was about 3 or 4 years. So after we got there, financial crisis, they laid off a lot of staff. And I survived. We survived. And they asked me to be the middle school pastor, the high school pastor, the Christian education person, and I don't know what else, the janitor, I think.
Right.
And it was about 3 or 4 years into that. And so I kept getting kind of promoted up the ranks. And pretty soon I'm preaching and teaching a lot when the pastor's gone. And it was about 3 or 4 years into it. I went, hey, this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I'm called to do. I mean, this is how you change the world through the local church. And so that love for the church became a passion for the local church, wherever it is. We were able to go on a missions trip with Brian's dad. And so first time out of the country for us, both of us, we're 23, 24 years old, 25 years old. We went to Sri Lanka off the coast of India.
That's quite a start. Yeah.
Quite a start.
Yeah.
And it wasn't church planting. It was just these mass crusades. There were thousands, I don't know, 10,000, 15,000 people. I don't know. Linda could tell us. And we saw the power of the gospel to save people's souls. And we saw signs and wonders and miracles like we had only read about in the book of Acts, right? And it was like, why would I want to do anything else? Here is one church that's having an impact in a different country on thousands of lives, not just sharing the gospel, but showing what the gospel can do. And so that's kind of really how I fell into that. I kind of went backwards, hanging on to like, I want to be a professor into, I want to be a pastor.
And Linda, for you, did that get more inspiring? Because you're like, were you like, oh yeah, now we're finally doing the thing I knew we would always do? Or were you a little like, I think we're supposed to do missions? I mean, was there still tension in that, or did it feel like?
Yeah. Well, we were doing missions really when the lead pastor lets us go to Sri Lanka. And we saw so much at that point. We were just like, wow, this is powerful. And it was at that point we went to a John Wimber crusade.
Oh.
And we've always been really great learners. And so, we had seen these miracles. And so we thought, man, we better get better at this. Because this is real. And so how do we learn more about this? And so we went and learned about praying for the demon possessed and healing and whatnot. And it just started and made this trajectory change for our life that was really pretty incredible. And John at that point said, tell me you don't believe in healing after you've prayed for 200 people. So we just started praying for everybody. And just watching God move in really supernatural ways in our life.
Yeah. I think that was another defining moment for us. It was the Signs and Wonders Conference in Seattle back in the mid-'80s. And the power, the presence of God was so real. And I think part of me shying away from ministry, pastoring, was I grew up in small rural churches, wildly Pentecostal. And even as a little kid, I would see stuff and I would go, that's weird. I don't think that's the way it should be. There needs to be a little bit more orderliness. And anyway, and I saw John explain, the signs and wonders and miracles, and the I think the orderliness of the Holy Spirit and how that is operated and expressed in a church. And I think that really helped me along the way to embrace the supernatural in a natural way and let the natural be supernatural in how God wants to work through our lives.
I think also the kindness. I mean, really valuing the person. We had never seen that.
Yeah, the dignity of human
The
beings.
dignity of human beings and the move of God and how that all can flow together. And it was beautiful for us. And we just it's like the lights went on for us.
That's so encouraging. How encouraging. Okay, so you're doing that. You're taking trips. Start to draw the lines because, of course, the church is growing. You've had this really healthy, great church for, a really long time. How did you start to get your heart around what you're doing now with Petros? Like, what were the moves that started to move you from, okay, we're a local church pastor that helps do some ministry in different parts of the world to like, man, we're really going to go in on this thing we can see God doing. And it started in Africa, right? And then you've now been doing stuff in different parts of the world. But describe how those moves started to happen.
Yeah, so fast forward from Eugene to Denver. I lived in Denver for 8 years and I worked at a church called Calvary Temple, a historic church at the time.
Yep.
The pastor, Charles Blair, had been pastor of that church, or was ultimately pastor of that church for 51 years. But we had planted a church within our church of Ethiopians. There was a large Ethiopian community, and some of their executives from Compassion International and Colorado Springs came up and said, hey, a lot of Ethiopians in the Denver area, and at that point, they don't have a church. Would you guys mind starting one, hosting one? And we did. So that was how the relationship with Africa, Ethiopia specifically, got started. We had moved from Denver to Portland, where we live now. And I got a call one day from Charles Blair, the pastor. He's now retired. He's 84 years old. And he's been in Ethiopia. And one of the presidents of the 9 federal regions of Ethiopia, it was a Christ follower, a young guy, and had found Charles Blair through a process of going to this person and that person and denominations saying, hey, I want to plant churches in my region. It's unreached. And if we can plant churches, we'll extend the kingdom to this part of the world. And, all the denominations in Ethiopia said, well, that's a great idea, but we don't have capacity for that. They had just come out of communism. So pastors had fled, they'd been in prison, they had died, whatever. So there was a lack of vibrant leadership there. So the president of the region said, hey, would you come and help me plant 1,000 churches? And I have 3,000 villages, they're unreached. And if you can help me plant 1,000 churches, those 1,000 will reach the other 2,000 and my region will belong to Jesus. And so Charles heard the appeal of this guy and he said, okay, I'll help you. And then he got on the plane to fly home and he just got panic stricken. Said,
what have I done?
Saying, what have I done? I'm 84 years old. I don't have a church anymore. He started writing a letter to the president to tell him, hey, after all, I can't do this. And here's why. I don't have this. I don't have that. And the Lord spoke to him really clearly. And he said, Charles, I didn't ask you what you don't have. What do you have? And Charles, having this conversation at 35,000 feet, said, well, I have friends. And the Lord spoke to him and said, just tell your friends and watch what I do. So he gets home, he calls me up, I'm sitting in my office, and he tells me this story of planting 1,000 churches. And I'm thinking, you're 84 years old, you probably ought to just sit down and take a nap or something.
Right.
But he was so excited about it. I said, man, I think it's a great idea. You should do that. And he said, okay, smart guy, if you think it's a great idea, you got to help me. And I just got suckered into it again. Anyway, that's how we got started. We ended up planting 1,000 churches. We came home, raised money for it. Brought 100 pastors from around the U.S. to Denver, Colorado, met in a hotel, told them the story, and they all committed to taking a part of that 1,000, 5, 10 at a time, and we're going to plant churches, which we did. And at the end of the 2 years of this guy's presidency, when he was going to leave, and then he was the only Christian in his cabinet. So we planted 1,000 churches in 2 years. During that time, Charles got sick and he couldn't do it anymore. So I was on the way to Ethiopia. He was going, and I get a call in Phoenix, Arizona, in the airport. And it's his assistant saying, hey, he's really sick. He's in the hospital. He can't go. You're in charge. I'm like, well, what? And that's kind of how I got started, working with church planning. And it was with a different foundation, but led that for another 5 years. He passed away. But by the time he passed away, and I really felt like we had finished our work there. They were doing church planning now on their own. It was time for us to leave and move on. But by 5 years, those 1,000 churches had become 1,700 churches. And hundreds of thousands of people had received Jesus who had never heard the gospel before. So I think in that experience is when I really developed a heart for church planning, for unreached people, kind of developed our missiology. We just watched what God was blessing, and we said, let's build our missiology around that. I'm smart enough to understand, do what God's blessing. And we eliminated some things that he wasn't blessing, and that's how we got our start. We then moved, and there were some real financial miracles in raising this money as well. My church got behind it. I thought maybe they would do 5 of these churches at about $2,000 a piece. That's all it takes. And on the commitment Sunday, I asked for people to make their commitments and walk there like you're going to walk your contract with the Lord down to faith promise down to the altar. That church on that Sunday planted 131 churches. And we were off to the races. I said, oh my, there is something on both sides of the equation, the African side as well as the American church side, when people figure out what they can do to really change the world. So,
okay, so I have like 400 questions in a row, but I'm gonna ask them in a very particular way, because I remember the first time sitting with you, hearing a version of this story. We're sitting at that little, you might not remember, but I remember we're sitting in a little outdoor cafe in Old Town Arvada.
Yeah.
And I remember, I've been with missionaries. I've been with Western missions agencies. And they tell stories, and then you go and actually try to check on what's happening. And it's not like slightly exaggerated. Like, it's like they told a story that is miles from what really happened. And so I remember sitting there with you thinking, I don't know. I'm not sure. This sounds a little 1,000 churches, 2 years, 84-year-old guy. I don't know. I'm not sure what I think about this. But then going away and praying, and then of course, as you know, I went out there to see what was happening in Ethiopia, and then we started to help in South Sudan. But tell me, like, if there's somebody listening who's like a missions type person, what were you guys? I mean, the right answer is always God was doing it. So that's what's obvious. But what is it that you guys were doing? What was the missiology that started to form in you in that work that made you say, okay, I think we have a way to do this? Because you mentioned like $2,000, churches partnering. So there's a lot of moving parts in there.
Yeah.
Describe those early days. What kind of like lit the match, so to speak? What got it going?
I think I began to really understand the Missio Dei a lot more clearly and what the Great Commission was all about. And I was frustrated that I didn't see us advancing that as quickly as I thought we had the capabilities of doing. And so I think what we determined early on that made it blessable was taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. I mean, literally, to the ends of the earth, the eschaton, and reaching unreached people. That God had a heart. You can see it all the way through Scripture for those who had never heard before, that everyone deserves a chance to hear. I mean, just because a person happens to be born in one of those places where there was no access to Jesus, that shouldn't limit their access to the gospel. So we saw how God favored that when we just preached the gospel, proclaimed it, and by sharing and by showing and giving people a chance to either accept it or reject it. That was our job. We also made a real commitment early on that we were not going to let anyone become dependent on us as white guys coming from America. I mean, it was about empowering the local denominations and sending churches and the local church to be the answer to their own evangelistic needs. To do that, we had to help them to become quickly sustainable. And we just baked into the process, you will become self-sustainable, you will reproduce. We just talked a lot about, we planted a church in this village. Now you send people out and reach the surrounding villages that are unreached. We collaborated with a lot of different denominations. It just kind of worked out that way, and really began to understand how God blesses the unity that's required. And it took a lot of work, a lot of effort to keep people on the same page. And then to see at the end of the day, or at the end of that missiology, that those communities, whether people are saved or not, because the gospel's there, they ought to be better. Life ought to be better. And so there's this redemptive lift we started calling. As far as we know, it wasn't. It was a term that we coined in that particular context. That all of life in those villages ought to get better. Fairer governance, women being empowered, marriages being healed, people respected, children respecting their parents, a work ethic, health, hygiene, all that and care for the environment, justice issues. And we saw how that was happening because we taught this is what happens when the gospel comes to a place. So we just built our missiology around that, and we have stuck with it now for close to 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll just add this. The focusing on the indigenous leader was so powerful, and that's what's made the rapid growth. We had our part that we played, and it was mostly funding, and we also do education. So we really are a leadership development organization. Success for us is when we can leave an area because, like Ray said, they are sustainable. But what's so powerful about an indigenous leader is they know the culture, they know the language. Many of them have been saved out of witchcraft or Islam or some other really radical religion. So they walk and nothing scares them, and they're willing to die. And I've watched again and again, as an American, we protect our own comforts, and you go into the developing world and there's one guy we were filming, and I said, "Hey, should I mask your face? Should I be careful about your name?" And he said to me, "Why?" And I said, "Well, we don't want to cause any persecution. We don't want to cause harm to you." And he said to me, "You mean I might die?" And I said, "Maybe." And he said, "And go to heaven?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "That sounds pretty good to me."
Yeah.
So it's a different breed of people. And that's why it's so rapid.
Yeah. So, well, I'm just going to say we really, in effect, are an incubator for church plants. We're just unleashing the local or the national church to do what they want to do anyway. We have these gifts that they don't have. We have resources. We have the ability to train and organize. They've got faith like you and I don't understand. I mean, they are willing to go out and die. They're willing to take on the darkness and the power of the Holy Spirit. And so it's really just about, us bringing what we do well, what they do well, bringing that together. That they weren't doing it before we came, and we weren't doing it without them. And so this is amazing, conflation of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, really, the passions that He puts in our heart, and it catalyzes a movement. Wherever we've been, it's catalyzed a movement. I don't know if it'll work this way everywhere. We kind of think it will, but at least in our experiences, it has just catalyzed this incredible church planting movement.
This summer, Vineyard USA is hosting our national conference, Melody and Harmony, in 2 locations, Denver, Colorado on June 16th through 19th, and Cincinnati, Ohio on July 14th through 17th. We hope that by offering 2 locations and dates, everyone, pastors, leaders, volunteers, even those just curious about the Vineyard, that everyone will be able to find a time to join us. The conference will also have specific programming for adults, youth, and kids. As far as our theme, throughout history, the Lord has been composing a beautiful melody through the story of His people and His church. And for the past 50 years, the Vineyard movement has had the privilege of adding its own unique harmony to this grand symphony. Registration's now open with early bird pricing, so make sure to check out vineyardusa.org to learn more and register today.
Yeah, and you said almost everything I was about to reflect back to you, which is, the indigenous leaders. We have a gift to give. We have this little bit. Our bit is to sort of convene, provide some education. We have a financial ability that most of the world doesn't have. And then the heart to work across denominations. That is really rare. People will work across denominations for humanitarian needs, for example, or, maybe a crusade, like an event. But to say, no, we're in the church planting business, but we want all the different people to plant churches. Whoever wants to work with us, we want to work with. I mean, not probably whoever, but those that we have faith for, that we can work with, we want to work with them. And we have a model that we think can help get the Western influence in the right spot. So it's not everything, it's these few things. And then our goal is to get out of there, like to make it so that they're all working. That was the thing that blew my mind first time I went and saw some of the work you were doing in Ethiopia. Was there was not a white person to be found. And they obviously loved you guys because of how you would serve them. But the way they talked about each other. They talked about this pastor and that pastor. And so we're working together with these pastors. We're going to plant churches in this next village. And they were happy we were there. I mean, so it wasn't like we weren't partners, but it was clear we weren't the show.
Right.
Like they were the show. Like we're doing something, and we're so glad you're here. This is so great. Thanks for coming. Can't wait to figure out how we partner together. So it was all very gracious. But often when you do missions, even church planting, you're the show. You show up and it's like, oh man, the people are here and you guys are the best. And think about all the amazing things you're doing. And it's kind of like, oh, this is weird. I think we're supposed to help you, not the other way around. It's almost like you're trying to make sure we're okay. I think we're supposed to be here to end. So everything you're describing is my experience. That's what I just watched. And even as we started to work in South Sudan. So talk a little bit about where the work has grown to and where you see the Vineyard fitting in. Maybe you, Linda, tell me a little bit about how's it continue to expand, since Ray already confessed he doesn't like details or numbers, or you can just tell me.
Yeah, it's amazing how God has put us together. So Ray is really the visionary. He's the theologian. He makes sure things stay on track.
Philosopher,
and I'm
don't forget that.
Philosopher, yeah. I'm the tactician. So he'll basically say, we're going into this area. We're going to plant. Our goal is 500 churches, which we only go into areas where we're invited. We never push our way in. And I'll just backtrack on this. One day we had a group of men in Ray's office, and around his office, he had all kinds of pictures and tribes of people. And they finally said to us, who's getting famous by this? And Ray's comment was priceless, because it was like, well, we kind of hope Jesus is getting famous by this. And so it's really a kingdom theology. How are we building God's kingdom? So after we were in the Benishangul Gumuz region, Ray walks into my office and he's shaking and he's holding a piece of paper. And it was an invitation to go to another region. And he says, Linda, I think this is it. I think this is it. And so we went into this other region, and then there we set a goal of 1,000. And then we were invited into another region. We were invited into another region that was 98% Muslim. We were told it will not work. It took a few years. And then after a few years, it's just exploded. And now in this area where there used to be a mosque on every corner, there is now churches being placed. And our goal is to plant a church within 10 kilometers of every village, or every person can be within walking distance of a church. And a big part of it, yes, we start it, we launch it, but we step away and they start multiplying it. And then the growth becomes exponential. So as we think about our future, what we love about the Vineyard is your kingdom theology. What we love about the Vineyard is your belief in how God can move and how he shows up. Because this is all a miracle. It's all a God thing. It's not a man thing. It's something that God gave us, and we just happen to have the courage to step out and say, yeah, send us. And we're also willing to go to the very ends of the earth to make that happen.
Yeah.
And make that work.
Yeah. Well, and tell me where you're working right now. Like what parts of the world have you started in and are sort of praying about? Or
So we are working in multiple areas in Ethiopia. We've gone into areas that are 0 to 1.7% unreached. it has to be in an unreached area. A church planter can only plant a church in a village that has no evangelizing presence, because we really cause a power encounter to happen into these areas. So we've literally made a cross out of Ethiopia, going up, down, and all around into these very unreached rural areas. We're also in Uganda. We're across northern Uganda, southeast Uganda. We're also in South Sudan. These are not easy areas. Times we get blocked. We were in South Sudan, and 4 days after we left, there was a bloodbath. So God's timing and getting out of there was just perfect. We've been in Myanmar because of Canyon View Vineyard Church, did an initiative in that area. We're talking about advancing. We'd love to advance in Nepal. We believe that that's something Vineyard wants to do, but that's also something that has been happening. We talk about the voice of God. We interviewed and hired a girl who worked for World Vision and was a missionary in Nepal. So we just kind of watch God start to call things out to us, and we just start hearing about it everywhere.
Wow.
And then we just begin to take the path to work in that area. Do you want to add, Ray?
I would just say we love to go to unreached, difficult, maybe even dangerous places that are not easy at all, but we've grown in a passion for that. And we always say, if it was easy, somebody else would already be there. So if we're really going to fulfill the Great Commission, to go to the ends of the earth, that's why we were empowered to take the good news to the ends of the earth. If we're going to preach the gospel before Jesus comes back to the whole world, the ta ethne, the ethnic groups, the people groups, we've got to be willing to go. And so, we're in Somalia. I don't know if Linda said this, but we're in
Somalia, Djibouti, Yemen.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
I want to plant churches in Saudi Arabia. Maybe my final act before I die will be to stand on the Kaaba, the thing there in Mecca, and go, on this rock I will build my church, and get shot and go to heaven. But I think if it's a tough place and Jesus has not been proclaimed there, we're really open. No, we know we can't go everywhere, but we want to be a part of at least inspiring other movements. I mean, again, we want to plant a church within walking distance of every human being, which is impossible for one organization like ours. But so part of why I did this, Jay, was I wanted people to see, as a local pastor, you could have an impact somewhere in the world. You could take one village. Some churches have the resources to take an entire region or a country. What if the 200 or 350,000 evangelical churches in the U.S. took a part of the world?
Yeah.
We would complete the Great Commission. We really would.
So say more about that, because I know I've taken a lot of your time, so we'll have to land the plane here somewhere, but say more about that, because every yes is a no, right? So there's not a single local pastor that feels like they have spare time.
Right.
I don't care if your church is 80 people, 8,000 people. There's not a local pastor that wakes up and goes, I've got this whole month free. I wonder what I should do with that. Or I have this 15 hours a week that I'm just wondering, what should I do? Because the needs of any local church is really substantial, where you're at. Mm-hmm. And so your heart catches on fire for another part of the world. How did you navigate? Because a lot of people that are listening to you right now and listen to us are local pastors. How did you navigate the needs of your local church? I'm sure there was any number of elders or board members or a local leader that says, hey, Ray, what are you doing? What are we doing? Have you not looked at our city? Do you not realize the youth group here needs da-da-da? Or we raised this money. Shouldn't we be giving that to this other initiative in our city or whatever? So some of it's you're just led by God. But how would you counsel a local pastor in navigating those tensions?
I would say refuse to be tyrannized by the or. It's not either or. This is both and this is what local churches were. That's why you're there, is to reach the local and around the world. I had all those pressures. I mean, I had people saying, hey, we're going to neglect this, we're going to neglect that. I didn't have enough time. We were committed up to here with missions already. How do we add another, expenditure onto that? We had general fund tithing. We were like barely making it. And I knew all of that going into it. And when I said yes to the Lord, I started to doubt if I should have said yes to the Lord on that. And he spoke to me so clearly. And this has become kind of one of those defining moments for me, just that internal voice. He said, Ray, if you will take care of the things I care about, I will take care of the things you care about. I know you have all of these needs, but you put me first in what I'm calling you to do. I'll make sure all of that's taken care of. And it was so clear to me that I literally, Jay, I stuck out my hand toward heaven and I shook God's hand. I said, you got a deal. And in the first month that we started, so first of all, I asked my elders to pray. I said, look, guys, you've got to be convinced of this. So you pray for a month and then let's talk about whether this is just a Ray idea or a God idea. So they prayed for a month and they came back and they had that kind of steely-eyed, look like this is of God. We must do this.
Yeah.
One of the guys said we should do it unapologetically, which I thought at the time, why did you say it that way? But then when you see the opposition that comes from people that feel like you're going to neglect something, you've just got to be convinced of it. I did the same thing with the church before we received offerings in our local church for this. I said, I want you to pray about this. You can't, it's going to sound like a great idea, but you can't rob Peter to pay Paul. If you've got other missions commitments, you got to stick with those. You can't take from your tithe to do this or I'll be in trouble. So you pray about it. And here's our singular rule for giving. If we're going to do this, here's a singular rule we have. Ask God and then just do what he says. If he says, you don't have to do anything, then you're off the hook. If he says do this, then give and watch what God will do. And so that month that we started this, 131 churches. The next program we did 364 churches, and one in a single Sunday. In both of those cases, that month, our general fund giving rose like 30%, and it never dropped back down. It was just like a new benchmark for us. Our missions giving was, hundreds of thousands of dollars better every year. The increase was just incredible. So we were, by the end of our time at Portland Christian Center, we gave, I think, $2.8 million away to missions.
Wow.
We weren't like a 5,000, 10,000 member church, but it just gripped the heart of the people. That's when you know that God is really stirring something. So I would just say, when you get serious about the Great Commission, when you see the Missio Dei is that God's glory would be exalted among all the peoples of the earth. You can't not do this, in my opinion. You can't not do this.
Well, and that mindset permeated local and global, as Ray mentioned. So we planted churches in our local community. We planted a skate church because skaters were an unreached people group.
Right.
We planted vertical churches, 5 of them, in our downtown area because we were able to do that to unreached people groups.
Yeah,
Somalians by thousands were moving into the Portland area, for example.
Literal vertical churches. We went to these high-rise townhome, condo complexes, and we had people in there that were Christ followers, and we said, hey, if you do this, here's how you can begin to gather people and tell them the story. So, I think what we do works here in the local context too.
Yeah. Okay. So one last question, which is, listen, I don't know a pastor that doesn't attempt stuff like you're talking about that doesn't experience significant warfare, not just on the field, like not just where we're doing the work, but the warfare chases back into your own life and the life of the church. How have you navigated and or built a way of managing the different pressures and tensions just for your own life, let alone in your own church? So we just talked about your own church. Yeah, there's pushback, but hey, we just got to be obedient, and the Lord has been faithful to bless that. But it's more than that. It's also your own life, and the people that you put into this work end up, I'm sure, with strange experiences they've never had before. That's at least my experience with this kind of work. All of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, this is real. Like real stuff's happening to me. How have you guys built a culture that helps support and or pray, or what? Give me just a sense of that, because I'm sure you've probably gotten a little further than you realized and went, wait a minute, I don't think we have the support we need. We need to beef that up. I'm sure that's happened more than once. Mm-hmm. How have you guys done that and then built and developed that?
Yeah, I think those early days of growing up in a pastor's home where there wasn't money and living on faith and seeing God come through really did define what God was going to do later with me. I think it helps that Lynn and I are both passionately committed to this. We took our daughters with us on different trips when they were late teens, early 20s, and they became passionate about this. So they're some of they're very successful right now in their own right and with their husbands, and they're some of our biggest financial supporters. So they get this. And yeah, I just think you have to become convinced of this, that this is it. This is the calling, and be honestly for us, and this might scare some people away, but willing to die for it. Yeah. I remember listening to Mark Walker and Thor Kohlberg, who were with us in South Sudan. Oh, yeah. And on one occasion, Mark was with another pastor, and they got caught in a crossfire, between opposing forces, and the bullets are flying, and they've dove to the floorboard of the car, and the pastor that Mark had brought said, "Mark, I'm afraid we're going to die." And Mark said, "You're going to die someday, right? So why not die? Why not die? Taking the gospel to people." And so that's kind of become our mentality. We don't want to die necessarily, but I don't want to choke on a potato chip sitting in my easy chair watching a football game. I mean, I would rather go out in a blaze of glory. So just not right yet, but yeah, no, that's how I'd like to end. I don't know, Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a big question. There's a lot of practical things that we can say to that. One, we've really not let anything, and if anything ever has, we've repented very quickly, come between the two of us. And so we are a whole household. We have both been called to this, and we've modeled that for our kids. And so we watch that even today. Of course, prayer. Of course, also, I was talking to my mom one day, and I was talking about, I don't remember what it was, a complaint, something. We've had no hardship. That's what I said to my mom. We've had no hardship. And she says, "Linda, you are crazy. You've had tons of hardship, but right. You see everything as an opportunity." And so I think our biggest fear, if we had one, is that we fear not pleasing our Lord. And so with that in mind, we're sold out, on fire, all in. And, you pointed out earlier in this podcast how, and you noticed things I hadn't even noticed, but the Lord has been orchestrating all the days of our life for this moment. And so it's wired deeply within us. We listen to him very carefully. And if he says go, we go. And what has been shocking is to watch the right person show up at the right time. Gifts. We've received $1 million for a gift from a person we've never even met. Wow. I mean, that's just crazy. But that's the kind of faith walk that you can have when you're just sold out. You get out of the way and you watch what God can do in you and through you. And that's been our mantra.
Yeah, I think it was William Carey, maybe Hudson Taylor, at the end of their life, said it was no sacrifice. It was no sacrifice. So we don't look at it that way. We get to do this. I mean, I grew up when I finally started reading the Bible as a teenager. I read through the book of Acts. I was just amazed by it. And I thought, I want to experience this for myself someday before I die. Yeah. And we are. I mean, this is what I live for. This is what I've longed for. And it is no sacrifice for us. No sacrifice.
What a gift. Well, and I'm just so grateful that you're willing to allow us to tag along and to try to be helpful in what God's obviously given you grace to do. Our hearts are so aligned. And like I said, I've gotten to watch some of what you've done in Ethiopia and in South Sudan and get to partner. And I'm just excited about what we're going to do next. I have faith that we're lined up.
Yeah, we are very excited about our partnership, burgeoning and growing partnership with the Vineyard movement. We align with what we think are your missional values, and however we can serve you and your vision to reach the world, we're on board. We're game.
It's encouraging. Well, I'll throw some stuff in the show notes for people to look at. They can see more about what you're doing or hear more about it. And, there's so much to talk about, how you're doing the training and what it means for a pastor to get involved. There's so many different components, but this helps us get our heart connected to what you're doing. And, I know you've been at pretty much everything we do. You've been at the nationals, you've been at the missions leaders meetings, you've been at all kinds of things, just connecting to pastors. It's clear your heart is to work with us. So I'm just really, really grateful. I feel really honored, and I can't wait to see what we get to do together. It'll be fun. Does anybody need the last word? Is there anything you didn't get to say?
Linda always gets the last word.
I'm the one who dreams dreams, and I get these words from the Lord. And we believe the Lord has given a word for the Lord for the Vineyard movement for such a time as this. And we believe that you will be one of the largest church planting movements the world has ever seen. And we're excited to walk along with you in that process.
May it be. We receive that. Bless you guys. Thanks.
As we celebrate our 50-year anniversary in the Vineyard, if you're interested in learning more about Vineyard history, there are plenty of resources for you. Check out our show notes for links to books, YouTube videos, and more to learn about Vineyard history and identity. And make sure to keep listening to the podcast this year for stories of Vineyard churches throughout the year.